In 1619, when the first Africans were brought to the British colonies by ship to Jamestown, Virginia, they held the legal status of servant. But as the region's economic system became increasingly dependent on forced labor, we descended into slavery. The institution of American slavery developed as a permanent, hereditary system centrally tied to race. Millions of black people were forcibly taken from Africa, crammed on ships and brought to the Americas through a dangerous and deadly journey that crossed the Atlantic. Millions died. Once on our shores, slavery deprived the enslaved person of any legal rights or autonomy, and granted the slave owner complete power over the black men, women, and children legally recognized as property. An ideology of white supremacy, a narrative of racial difference was created to rationalize and justify the continuation of slavery. American slavery was often brutal, barbaric, and violent. In addition to the hardship of forced labor, enslaved people were maimed or killed by slave owners as punishment for working too slowly, visiting a spouse living on another plantation, or even learning to read. Enslaved people were also sexually exploited. The United States Congress finally banned the importation of slaves from Africa in 1808. Slavery was widely considered a gross human rights violation, yet enslavement was retained and persisted. The 1808 Declaration caused the demand for slave labor to skyrocket in the Lower South, and the domestic slave trade grew to meet this demand. Between 1808 and 1860, the enslaved population of Alabama grew from less than 40,000 to more than 435,000. Slave traders chained African Americans together in couples and forced them to march hundreds of miles from the Upper South to the Lower South. Steamboats carried slaves along the Alabama River. Rail routes constructed with slave labor brought hundreds of enslaved people to Montgomery, Alabama every day, turning the city into one of the largest slave trading communities in the United States. Enslaved people would be paraded up Commerce Street to slave warehouses and slave depots. The city's slave market was at the Artesian Basin, now known as Court Square. Enslaved people of all ages were auctioned along with livestock, standing in line to be inspected. Public posters advertising the sale of slaves included gender, age, skill, complexion, owner's name, and price. Slavery in America traumatized and devastated millions of people. Husbands and wives, parents and children could not protect themselves from being sold away from each other. Enslaved families were separated at an owner's or auctioneer's whim, never to see each other again. The domestic slave trade separated nearly half of all enslaved people from their spouses and parents. In 1833, the Alabama legislature banned free black people from residing in the state, meaning that enslavement was the only legally authorized status for African Americans. Even as the Civil War raged, slave trading in Montgomery flourished well into the mid-1860s. After the Confederacy's surrender in 1865, Congress passed the 13th Amendment, which prohibited slavery nationwide except as a punishment for crime. But in many former slave states, slavery did not end. It simply evolved. Southern whites, angry after losing the war, targeted black people who were largely abandoned by the federal government in the 1870s. For decades, black men, women, and children were tortured, terrorized, and killed by mobs and violent lynchings, oppressed by a system of racist laws and customs. For another 100 years, black people were racially segregated, denied the right to vote, education, and basic dignity. They were humiliated, beaten, or killed for minor offenses or for protesting. The civil rights movements of the 1950s and 60s helped to end legally authorized racial segregation, but racial bias still persists. Today, a presumption of guilt is assigned to many people of color who are disproportionately arrested, convicted of crimes, and sent to prison. African Americans are 6 times more likely to be sentenced to prison for the same crime as a white person. 1 in 3 black males born today can expect to spend time in prison during his lifetime. Police violence against black people is so epidemic that civil rights demonstrations have shut down cities across the U.S. as thousands of people march to protest police brutality. Many states celebrate the era of slavery with Confederate holidays and by honoring the defenders and architects of slavery while ignoring the history of enslavement. The Equal Justice Initiative believes that racial bias remains a serious problem and is a direct and lasting legacy of American slavery and our failure to deal with the history of racial injustice. The Equal Justice Initiative seeks to foster an honest conversation about the legacy of slavery, about mass incarceration, and racial inequality and how it still affects millions of people today. We can confront and overcome bias and discrimination. Please join us in this conversation so that we can move forward together.
Touching. Griffin. Fostering an honest conversation about the legacy left by the experience of slavery in this country is why we're here today. Welcome to the Time to Talk, a community conversation on poverty, criminal justice, and race. Got too quiet. One of the quotes from the Equal Justice Initiative is that the myth of racial difference created to sustain America's slavery persists to today. Slavery did not end in 1865, it evolved. How it evolved and what the residue of its evolution has been is why we have the issues we have today with criminality in America. My name is Shelby Brown. I am Managing Director of Everyday Democracy. Thank you. I've had the privilege over the last 3 or 4 months of leading a very passionate group of people who've come together to organize this event today. We've organized ourselves into what we call I want to make sure I get it right. Poverty, Criminal Justice, and Race Collaborative of Connecticut. We want to welcome you here today. We're excited about the conversation that we're going to have. This is an opportunity for us to learn together, to have really meaningful conversation, and then to begin to plan action that's going to help us move Connecticut to a better place. This collaborative consists of Everyday Democracy, the Phoenix Association, the Institute for Municipal and Regional Policy, the City of Hartford Reentry Welcome Center, Community Capacity Builders, ACL Smart Justice of Connecticut, the Catal Center for Health, Equity, and Justice, Community Solutions, Capital Community College, and a handful of community change agents, including Ashley Stewart, Daryl McGraw, and Karim Holness, who have come together passionately, as well as, of course, others who have supported from the edges. We've come together to really pull this day off, but more than that, we've consistently referred to the work that we're doing. Wow. Thank you. As the first pebble in the pond. This is the beginning of the conversation that we hope to inspire across the state. Our expectation is that we will help everyone here take part in carrying this conversation to all corners of the state of Connecticut. Many people have lauded the state for having done a good job of reforming criminal justice, of having changed the state of criminality. However, those of us who live here know that there is still far too much work that needs to be done.
Amen.
That work does not get done if we only rely on policymakers, courts, or public officials to make it happen. What is required is that the people of Connecticut, people just like you and me, look around this room, people represented by each and every one of us, including each and every one of us. We are the ones who are going to help to make Connecticut the state that it needs to be, so that life and experience in Connecticut is no longer shaped by the amount of money you have in your pocket or the color of your skin. So today, as we begin our conversation together, we have some things that we want to just agree to so that we can have the most thorough and honest and challenging and productive conversation possible. The group came up with these group agreements. But as you join your circles later, you'll have an opportunity to enhance those group agreements, to take away what does not work for your table, to add to those group agreements. But we must have an agreement, a set of agreements about how we will engage with each other. What the committee feels is that this is learning space, and that in this space, we want to give each other grace. We know that everybody doesn't enter this space with the same amount of knowledge about criminal justice, or about race, or about poverty. We know that we're all on a different journey in terms of where we've been, what we've seen, what we know. So as we enter this space, we want to give each other grace. Know that there are others who are learning, and as they learn, they may make some mistakes. They may use the wrong term, they may refer to someone differently than they should, but it's important that we give them the opportunity to learn. As we learn new words and grapple with new ideas, we will treat each other with the kind of dignity and respect that all human beings deserve. We will honor this space with each other and recognize that each person's story is their very own personal possession. No one has to share what they do not choose to share. But if someone should choose to share, we will give respect to what they share. We are called to engage in a courageous conversation, knowing that in a courageous conversation, everyone is entitled to safety, but no one is entitled to comfort. You may find yourself being uncomfortable at some point in the conversation. We ask you to lean into your discomfort, because that's where you find the greatest opportunities to learn. Some of the terminology that we feel is important to share, and mind you, there's a handout that ACLU was kind enough to share with us all. If you have not gotten a copy of that handout, please be sure that you get a copy of it. That handout includes a number of terms that are important for us all to embrace and understand as we grow in our ability to have conversations about race, poverty, and criminal justice. But there are three that we want to focus on: justice involved, justice impacted, and implicit bias. These are terms you'll hear over and over again today. And although these definitions may not be the end-all, be-all definition, you may in fact have a definition that you believe is more perfect than these. But for the purposes of our ability to all come together on the same page, let us embrace these definitions for today and use them as our opportunity to launch a conversation together. So at this point, I'm going to move on out of the way and introduce my colleague, Andrew Clark, to the podium. If you would open your brochures, there's a really wonderful picture of Andrew here. Andrew's the director of the Institute of Municipal and Regional Policy at Central Connecticut State University. And, I'm not going to read this entire bio. I encourage you to read it. But what I will share is that when I first met Andrew, Andrew was working with my friend Richard, who's here in the room, at Hartford Public Library to engage conversations about children whose parents had been incarcerated. That was really important work, and I don't know if any of you in the room were part of that work, but Andrew's organization helped provide statistics, data that helped us advance that conversation. So that's a really important role that the Institute plays. It also has played a really important role in Connecticut in looking at profiling, racial profiling, and how people have been disadvantaged by driving while being Black. So I'm not going to say anymore. I'm going to ask my colleague to come on up. And from here, Andrew.
Thank you, Shelby. Thank you, Everyday Democracy, for hosting this today. It's great to see so many people here. I saw that opening shot there before by Brian Stevenson, and it's just so poignant, and he's such a tremendous communicator on this issue. In terms of the picture, I just want to point out in the back of the room there, John Lucas. It's thanks to him. I don't usually pay attention to that type of stuff, but he's recently began working with us and he's actually a producer and director of films and has a great film called Full of Bandits that I suggest you all take a look at. But again, thank you, Everyday Democracy. That work that we did together with children of incarcerated parents really impacted us. It helped to drive the issue forward, brought us closer to community. We had conversations all around the city here in Hartford, brought people to the table to see how it impacted them in their neighborhoods, and did some really meaningful things to that issue. I also like to thank the Chrysalis Center. I grew up in Farmington, but I've been living in Asylum Hill for the past 18 years. So Chrysalis is my neighbor. And I sat on the neighborhood revitalization zone, and they had wanted to move to a new spot and got a real lot of resistance, the whole NIMBY. But through their dedicated efforts, they really have put together a tremendous resource here in the neighborhood, and I welcome anyone to look around and ask questions about it afterwards. So I'm going to moderate today. I'm not going to say too many things, but just in terms of, I think Shelby pointed out to you, I'll point out this little thing that has the bios in it, so I would encourage you to read them because I'm not going to spend too much time on bios. What the format is going to be is our keynote. Dr. Peter Edelman will be speaking for about 10 minutes. He's going to frame the issue nationally on his pertaining to his book, Not a Crime to Be Poor, and then we're going to have some real local, passionate voices talking about particular areas for about 5 minutes each. I'll ask some questions to kick it off, and then we'll go to the audience, and then we'll wrap it up. So, again, I'm not going to read Peter Edelman's bio. I was at an event last night that was sponsored by Everyday Democracy, and he spoke there, and I had a chance to talk a little bit more there. He's also on a number of YouTube. I would suggest seeing some longer talks by him if you have an opportunity. But what I will say is what really struck me about it is the breadth of his knowledge and experience in government. So working with all three branches of government on the federal level, from the Supreme Court. He worked with Edward and Bobby Kennedy, so in the thick of the civil rights movement, all the way up through the Clinton administration, where he famously resigned because of the work that was being done on welfare reform. But he's also worked at universities in Massachusetts. He worked in New York as well in the state agency. And what hit me most of all was his passion. So it was getting late at night. We had all been hanging out for quite a bit. He talked for quite a while. And there weren't a whole heck of a lot of us left in the room. And he had just gotten a flight earlier that evening, came right to the Mark Twain house and was asked, would you like to go to bed? It's getting late and had a long day. And his answer was no. He was motivated by the conversation that was happening. And he was passionate about being there, getting to know a little bit about what's going on in Connecticut. And it just spoke to me about his passion and drive for this. So I want to welcome him. And, we have a real opportunity to learn from him, but also learn from each other. So we'll frame the issue for this conversation and then move on into the dialogues that are going to occur at the tables. So, Peter Edelman.
Hello! Wow, this is terrific. Thank you, Andrew. I know that we have everyday democracy, not just in Connecticut. Where am I? Just seem to be listening. I was there once, but anyway. Don't go there so much anymore. poverty, criminal justice, race, and this conversation about what you're going to do in Connecticut is it's just so glad to be a part of it with you. The mass incarceration, which I think is sort of synonymous with criminal justice, is something we've been living with horribly for a long time. And we're not done. And this conversation today is largely, I think, about mass incarceration. And of course, you can't talk about it without talking about poverty. You can't do it without talking about race. And doing it in the community, as you're doing today, I think it's just vital if we're going to get the kind of improvement and reform that we have. And so it just thrills me to be here. The work that you're going to do here today and that we need to do is what do we do in our community, but that gets complicated because we can help people, as some of you do in your work and some of you in what's happened in your lives on the individual level, have to do that. But we need to have change in the whole structure. And some of that's in local government, but at the state level, the national level, and we need to figure out how to have our, what we do, cover all of that, and that's no simple thing. And indeed, if we're going to change what's happening to the criminal so-called justice system, it's important about these other two words here, poverty and race, because those are subjects that are even bigger. And so we have to work on changing the structure of the criminal law. But we also need to be thinking, even here, but certainly in everything that we do, if we're going to have the changes we need to be talking about income, jobs, education, housing, healthcare, and the list goes on, really and on. Because what we want is that people never enter the system in the first place. And if we're going to do that, we need to work on all of those things that I talked about. And because we have to reduce the entrance in the first place. So the fact that you've got these three things, poverty, race, poverty, criminal justice, you're by definition talking about the broadest things that really are the kind of change that we need in our country. So I think that I would want us to have at least that perspective. We can't get to every issue and get into all the depth that we want here, but certainly to be thinking about that. That is part of everyday democracy, it seems to be. Now, I'm going to just talk for a few minutes. I could stop right there, by the way. I done. But I wrote this book, which you have out there, some of you have, and that's a piece of mass incarceration. So I wrote this book because, I suppose I could have written a book about mass incarceration. So a lot of people have written that. We're still not done with that. Maybe I made a contribution to it or not. But what happened here that caused me, this is part of what we want to talk about today. I want to be clear, I think we want to talk about all of mass incarceration today. It's vital. But that we talk about the criminalization of poverty that's happened, and we sort of, as a country, I think woke up to these fines and fees and what we're doing with money bail, but also other ways that we criminalize, taking kids not to the principal's office, but sending a child to court for something, a little thing that happened, on the playground. That's criminalization of poverty as well, and other things along that about what happens to homeless people when we make a ban on sleeping outside and throw people in jail for that. That's criminalization of poverty. So it's a broader idea than the fines and fees and the money part, money bail. So what happened? I mean, let me give you one example, because what we discovered as a result of Ferguson, of course, the terrible thing of the killing of Michael Brown, but as a consequence of that and the circumstances of that, the Department of Justice came down and kind of looking at what was going on in that little city right outside of St. Louis, and discovered that there was this bizarre thing going on that the city itself was getting the money to run the city by arresting its people over and over again on these incredibly high fines and fees and holding them for bail. So there was the Department of Justice did a terrific study of it. It was put on a book and all of that, and we found out that it was going on all over the country. And I don't get it for myself. I've been working on this stuff for 50 years in my life on race and poverty and race and mass incarceration. And I didn't know about this stuff. I'm supposed to know this stuff. So we're waking up to that. And the fact that set of things, and every state is a little bit different. So some of the things that are bad other places are not so troubling or even a bad problem here in Connecticut, and others are quite serious. I mean, so when we talk about this, what's happening here in the state, maybe it's in some parts of local, the courts in particular places in the state, what are the fines that are there and the fees that are there and losing the driver's license, all of these things. What's specifically here? Money bail is an issue in Connecticut, and we're going to talk about that because we have the bail fund here with the person who knows the most in this. So that's essentially what's for us. Maybe I have time to just give you one example in the national sense. I mean, all of this, let me say again, as you look state after state, and I'm sure it's true in Connecticut, whatever is happening that is, just as it is with mass incarceration itself, the people who get hit by these fines and fees, the money bail problems, they're disproportionately people of color. So this is always part of race. That's why we're so correct in saying this, that this is the way we're framing our discussion. So just the one story I'll tell you is a man named Peter Edwards, and this is in Georgia, and maybe the specific thing doesn't happen here, but it give you the national context of it. That's really national, Peter Edwards in Georgia was arrested. This was a man who had serious intellectual disability, could not read and write. He was arrested for not having a permit to burn leaves in his backyard. And he was found guilty, didn't have a lawyer to begin with. He gets saved later on in the story. $500 for that permit thing. And another $528 for so-called probation for profit in the state of Georgia, and he couldn't pay the $250 that they demanded right away, and they threw him in jail. And he was one of the fortunate ones that happened to be at the Southern Center for Human Rights, and he was doing work in that county, and found Mr. Edwards and made things right because it was unconstitutional. But you don't have that. And indeed, one of the questions that we have and we need to be thinking about here is we don't have enough lawyers. It's only one part of it. And even on the criminal side where we have Gideon, we don't really have it for everybody, and certainly we don't have it on the civil side because there isn't even a constitutional right for that. So I just always talk about Adel Edwards because I think, although there are thousands of stories like that, just to ground us in terms of what this is like. And so that's the part of fines and fees, and of course the money bail is definitely here in Connecticut, and it's what happens here is it happens all over the country. But that is, I don't have money, but they say for some little dinky thing that happened, I'm supposed to pay $500 or $1,000 that I don't have before we'll let you out, and therefore you plead guilty. It's the only way you get out. And then you owe money for a payment plan and so on, and you're stuck. And that's an issue here in your state. And finally, just to say, well, really two things. I mentioned at the beginning, but all of these others had criminalization of poverty. Let's not forget that. I want to stress that people are working across the country and making a difference on fighting back. But it's very, very important to know that, whether it's litigation, whether it's legislation, and legislation means all of you, because the third thing is getting people organized, put out the same kind of visibility for these issues of criminalization of poverty that we have for mass incarceration, where there is broad understanding and still have a lot of work to do. So I see that as kind of three legs for a stool. And the third role of it is you. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, great friend of Dr. King, said it this way. He said, we're not all guilty, but we're all responsible. Right. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Edelman. As a student of process, I'd say, first off, your passion is evident, and it's tremendous to hear just a snippet of your experience and your insight. I was luckily able to grill him for about a good solid hour last night. And so if anyone has an opportunity in individual conversation, I would highly recommend it. So next up, we have Anderson Curtis, and his bio is in here too, but I'll just say about Anderson that we've been in the criminal justice reform movement for a number of years together now, and he is a tremendous personality, and he's always there, he's always present, making sure, most importantly, that people who have been impacted by the issue have a seat at the table. And he's doing that now with the ACLU, with the Smart Justice Initiative, and it's just a pleasure always a pleasure to be working with Anderson. So welcome you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to thank you all for attending today. As Shelby said, we had a great time planning this, and so without further ado, here's my contribution. Mr. Edelman, I'm going to quote something from your book. Page 167. Connecticut's prison population began falling its all-time high in 2008. Of 2016 has decreased 25%. New York Times lauded the leadership of Governor Danny Malloy, also noting the state's repeal of death penalty, legalizing of medical marijuana, enactment of some restricted gun laws in the country. 2015, the governor proposed a second chance society. Package of bills which passed with bipartisan support. The measures include reclassifying simple drug possession as a misdemeanor, ending mandatory minimum sentences for nonviolent drug possession, expediting parole hearings for people convicted for nonviolent crimes, and simplifying the pardon process. I'm going to say that again. Simplifying the pardon process. Now, this paragraph and other articles and papers and magazines paint the appearance Connecticut has achieved a true second chance society. I'm going to read this post from another criminal justice advocate. Pardons are granted but not purged from Connecticut's criminal justice system. As a youth, a young man made a poor choice and was ultimately adjudicated youthful offender. To paying his debt to society, he went on to change his life by graduating from college and ultimately securing a full pardon. This young man goes on to apply for and was offered and he accepted employment with the state of Connecticut Judicial Branch. He was given a start date and assigned an office to report to. But then, it was discovered he had a prior YO. His employment was placed on hold and untimely rescinded. To add insult to injury, his legal history was still available in the system for everyone to look at. And guess what? They did. Are we a second chance society or are we not? I will not stand here today and bellyache about the collateral consequences I face daily. I'm not going to tell you about the woman in Texas who started to serve a prison term for voting. But what I will do is challenge all of us to open our hearts today in our group discussions to truly take time to talk about how all of us can transform Connecticut in a state where public safety is redefined by communities of all of us all across this state. For us to truly allow the truth to make us free, we must first come to grips with the reality of until all of us have access to life, liberty, employment, housing, education, the ability to provide for our families with dignity, none of us will be truly free. I'd like to thank you for attending and participating in A Time to Talk today.
Thank you for that call to action, Anderson. Up next, we have Anna Maria. I met Anna Maria, I think, when the Connecticut Bail Fund was getting up and operational, and we were, I was working with the Sentencing Commission here in Connecticut, and we were talking about bail reform. And they were so passionate about this issue coming up from New Haven, and I've just followed, mostly from afar, her passion for work with immigrants and immigration, and also the bail fund. So I'm very excited to hear from Anna Maria today.
Hello, good afternoon. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks for Henderson. I'm truly inspired by all the work that Smart Justice at the ACLU is doing, and so excited to share the stage with amazing people here today. So I'm one of the co-directors of the Connecticut Bail Fund. We are a community abolitionist organization in New Haven, fighting against the harms of incarceration, and also building power amongst those most impacted to fight against mass incarceration, mass deportation, and homelessness. And when the Bail Fund started, it really started my colleague Brett at the time was a Yale student and was learning about community bail funds all over the nation and what they were doing to challenge the bail system, and really embedding community bail funds in communities to as a broader strategy for abolition. Right? Because it doesn't stop by just abolishing bail, but it has to stop by abolishing all prisons altogether. And so at the time, he and a bunch of other community activists and leaders met together and decided we need to look at this issue in Connecticut. There's over 3,000 people every day in Connecticut that are incarcerated pre-trial just because they can't afford bail. And so the Bail Fund started in November of 2016. At that time, I was working for another organization focusing on immigration and the intersection between the criminal legal system and the immigration system. And we had a conversation about, hey, we need a pretrial defense fund, but we also need an immigration bond fund to support people that are in removal proceedings. So right now, we have a number of different programs. We have a pretrial fund that we use to bail out people from the state. We've bailed out 200 people as of today from the pretrial system, and we've bailed out 32 people from the immigration system. We practice an organizing model called participatory defense. So every week we have a meeting in our office where people come together. Whomever's freedom might be at stake, either themselves or their family members, they come together and they talk about their cases, because it could be a very lonely and isolating process to be facing criminal charges or deportation. So it's a space where people collectively share ideas about, it's not about the incident itself. That's not really what we're trying to address. What we're trying to do is humanize the person to the judge and to the court system, saying this person may or may not have committed what they're being charged, but they're still a person, they still have a family, they still have a community that wants them to be in the community, not caged. And so out of that really has grown something that we thought could happen, but we didn't have any idea how it would happen, and that's our Housing Not Jails collective. And that grew out of because there was a lot of the people that we were bailing out of New Haven were housing unstable or just living on the streets. And their own survival and what they were doing every single day was being criminalized. So they were being given tickets for panhandling, even though panhandling is not supposed to be illegal in Connecticut, but they would get a ticket for something else, public disturbance. They would get arrested for criminal trespass for having to sleep on a bench because they didn't have anywhere to go. And so we were seeing these folks in prison every single day, unable to pay a bail bondsman $50 to get out of jail. And we started bailing them out and inviting them into our weekly meetings. And people started talking with each other about what they were experiencing every day on the streets. And they used the space, yes, to talk about their individual cases, but more to talk about what are we going to be doing collectively to challenge the system that continues to criminalize our survival and our existence. And so Housing Not Jails is currently a collective of people that are living on the streets, or people that were recently living on the streets and are now pushing the city of New Haven to pass a resolution to decriminalize homelessness and a Bill of Rights, a homeless person Bill of Rights. So that's really exciting. And so I want to have more of a dialogue, but our strategy with the bail fund, like I mentioned, is really to embed it in a broader abolitionist agenda. And to put it in simple terms, we think about it in three ways. One is stopping incarceration altogether, stopping pretrial detention, stopping prosecution of certain crimes, stopping jail time for certain crimes. It's shrinking, right? How do we shrink the current population that continues to grow in the state, but also in immigration? In the 80s, there were only 30 people detained for immigration purposes, and now that's 42,000 people every single day. So how do we stop, how do we shrink, and how do we build, right? Because we need to be thinking about how do we address the harms that are caused? How do we support people that are experiencing a lot of things in their community and their interpersonal lives that are perhaps leading them to have to be in these situations? So how do we create, not really reform what exists right now, because I was seeing in the video, and as a lot of the people were talking earlier, a system that is rooted in racial bias and racism and capitalism ultimately can't be reformed, in our view. It needs to be completely gutted, and it needs to be created into something that's actually going to create a society that we want to live in. And so this is my Bible. Angela Davis wrote this short book called Are Prisons Obsolete? And it's amazing. If you haven't read it, get it, because it'll tell you everything you need to know. But she says, the prison therefore functions ideologically as an abstract site into which undesirables are deposited, relieving us of the responsibility of thinking about the real issues afflicting those communities from which prisoners are drawn in such disproportionate numbers. This is the ideological work that the prison performs. It relieves us of the responsibility of seriously engaging with the problems of our society, especially those produced by racism and increasingly global capitalism. So, thank you so much.
Thank you, Maria. We actually hosted Angela Davis to speak on that book at CCSU, one of my first years at the Institute. It was in 2007. We had it on video with folks from Connecticut on a panel with her, so I'd be happy to share that with folks if they want to see that. It was fascinating work. And I just also want to point out, from my perspective at least, the voices of Anderson and Anna Maria, in my experience in the 20 years within the justice system, they had been cries in the wilderness in the beginning parts, because it was mostly the system trying to, as you were talking about, reform. And I see them now mobilizing and getting energy behind them and moving to collective action. So the thing like the ACLU Smart Justice, the work that you're doing, and you see how once you go from ideas and individual ideas, and then you collect and get together, how they can grow, like you've been talking about, and you can see it, and it'll be fascinating to see how that then impacts policy moving forward. Well, someone who I've known for a while and has been within the system creating reform is Judge Erika Tindill. And maybe it was just the universe talking when you said Kentucky, because we actually spent some time in Kentucky together as part of the Toll Fellow program to the Council of State Governments. And that was the last time I spent significant time with her. But I just will say that she's got a tremendous personality and a passion for this issue. And she'll speak more to her early work as director of the Connecticut Coalition Against Domestic Violence and as deputy director for New Haven Legal Assistance Association, where she certainly experienced the intersection of crime and poverty and race firsthand in that work. So, Judge Tindill.
Oh, goody, I'm tall. Good afternoon. I think the reason why we were so quiet after that video is because it's so heavy, right? None of us clapped. You feel a little, I remember when I was a middle schooler and my mother and I watched Roots. And I went to school the next day giving the side eye to my white classmates. It feels a little like that. I am so grateful to be here and so appreciative of my friend, my sister, Shelby, she's not really my sister, but for inviting me here and thinking about what has been said so far. I want to make just a few comments. I'll be brief because anyone who knows me knows I can talk. So you can't get a lawyer to stand up and have them say something short, but I'm going to do that today. Conversation in the community is vital to measurable and transformative change. It's vital. Among other things, the problem has been that we cannot talk about race. Unless and until white people, people with privilege, people in positions of power, and those with resources can engage in meaningful discourse about racism, bigotry, bias, and privilege, and use what they learn and discover to shift the status quo, nothing changes. Thank you. So just some brief thoughts, and I'll sit down, about what we must keep in mind, not only today, but as we move forward. Number one, parents cannot give what they don't have. In fact, no one can give what they don't have. We must keep in mind the effects of trauma and understand the effects of trauma and what that is. We must, if we don't already know it, believe and understand that we belong to each other. We must remember, because many of us have forgotten, that we the people have the power, all of the power. And I recommend that we educate ourselves, that we take responsibility, and that we take action where and how we can, wherever we are. Thank you.
Thank you. And okay, so call to action in terms of that conversation. It made me think. So we got a holiday coming up. which we call Thanksgiving, which I know a number of people probably don't see it in the same way, but there'll be a bunch of white people getting together, including my family. Why don't we're streaming this on Facebook Live, right? Why don't we do a Facebook thing where each of our folks get together and plays that at the beginning of Thanksgiving? And we have a conversation. Other than mine, if all us other white people will do it in there, all right? I know we don't have a tremendous amount of time. I guess I'll move to this. We don't have a tremendous amount of time for this because we want to get into the dialogue within the tables. So I had two questions I was going to ask, one in the beginning and then one in the end. But I'll ask them both, and then we'll go to some audience questions. And it's to all of the panelists. They are kind of broad. But so what do you find is the greatest barrier to creating a society that does not criminalize race and or poverty? And second one, are you optimistic that true reform or dismantling can happen? And name an example that gives you hope.
I tend to be an optimistic person, a bit of a Pollyanna, so I'm probably not the one to ask about that. I do think that there is some momentum and a shift in American society now. It feels dire, but if you think about the statistics around the midterm election, and in a century, we haven't had turnout and political discourse and engagement the way we have in this moment. So I'm optimistic, but a few things have to happen. First, what was the first question?
What's the greatest barrier to creating a society that does not criminalize race?
Because, it goes back to what I say, I think, and let me just, I didn't mention this caveat, but though I'm a judge in the Superior Court, my views and what I say today are my own and not that of the judicial branch. But I don't lose my humanity because I'm a judge. So I think the problem is, and we are all guilty of this, black and brown and poor and white and privileged and rich, because we're unable to have the conversation, and I don't mean the conversation where something happens and a white person says, well, I didn't mean it that way, so why are you offended? End of conversation. That's not the conversation I'm talking about. But I mean, because we are unable to separate whiteness from white people, when we have conversations with white people about race, often white people are offended because they're here in the room, or they're doing what they need to do, or they feel like they're being attacked, because it's not a good place to be, and there's only a tiny, small population of people who are proud to be racist, right? There are some, but for most people, I think that's a very uncomfortable position to be in. It's very uncomfortable and can feel unsafe. So I think separating the standard of whiteness, which we all have to live by, black, brown, poor, white is at the top, and we all aspire to that, the way we dress, the way we speak, the way we move in the world, how we interact with each other. If I'm interacting with Andrew in Kentucky in our leadership thing, or if I'm with Shelby, at dinner, it's different, right? So the reason why is we can't separate race from it. We're not able to say, this is happening because we're afraid of black men. This is happening because black women are considered this way. This is happening, we're not able to say that. We make it about other things, so we never get to what the problem is. That's just my opinion.
I agree 100%. I mean, it's exactly that. And I think when you look at in the criminal justice world, some of the conversations that are happening about, for example, like how do we replace what we have right now that isn't working with something else? Not having a racial justice not doing that work with a racial justice lens is incredibly problematic, because then you just create another system that replaces what we currently have, but it's still a racist system. And so I think you need to have those conversations, like you said. You need to roll up your sleeves and have a conversation with your neighbor and with the people at the table about how history and our blood, right, and our ancestors, all of this matters in the work that we're doing. And we can't do the work that we're doing without taking that into consideration. And we have to look at the things that, I mean, the proof is in the pudding, right? When it comes to bail, and I went up there and I was so moved by what everyone was saying that I forgot everything that I had planned on saying around bail. But when you look at bail in Connecticut, the average bail for a white man is $68,000. For a black man, it's $112,000. And so you can't ignore what's right there in front of us. And by replacing it by another system that is looking perhaps, I know there's a lot of conversations around risk assessment, but risk assessment tools are still looking at contact with police, are still looking at contact with poverty, right? Somebody experiencing poverty. They're still looking at all these factors that primarily affect communities of color. And so you just, again, you replace one system with another. And really, if you want to gut it out, you have to go to the core. You have to go to the root of why things are the way they are. I am optimistic because I think that a lot of the conversations that some of us were having in small rooms a few years ago are becoming a little bit more mainstream, right? Like abolish ICE is the new sexy thing that people are talking about. Well, before it was like, we can't imagine a world without ICE, right? But a world without ICE existed before 2002. So then we could imagine a world without ICE, right? We could imagine a world without prisons because there used to be a world without prisons. I mean, obviously there's like a whole historical thing, but the fact of the matter is that these ideas are becoming more mainstream and that more and more people are coming at the table. And I think more and more people are also realizing that we can't really gut the system and create something that's going to work for all of us without including people that are directly impacted by the system. And so that's why it's so important that like the ACLU Smart Justice cohort is out there and is putting people that are directly impacted right at the center of the conversation, because otherwise we're not actually going to have anything good come out of these conversations. So.
I'm trained as an addiction counselor, and one of the things I love is the change process. And I'm remotely familiar with it from my own life experience. So one thing that I would have to say is becoming comfortable being uncomfortable in these conversations. Whether racism is intended or not, being willing to take responsibility for where it lands on both sides. I have my biases, we all have biases, let's be real. So taking ownership of those biases, becoming aware of them, but then doing something about it, having a different type of conversation, leaning into it, like Shelby said in the beginning for today. This is what it's about today. That phrase, we're all entitled to safety, but not comfort, came out of a racial justice summit I went to for DCF. So, you know, everybody's willingness to engage in this process is critical to where this goes, but also in the state of Connecticut, we are all justice impacted. Until we begin to see that all of our communities are responsible for redefining public safety, creating opportunities for people who are returning from prison, whether you live in Enfield, Bridgeport, Darien, Greenwich, wherever it may be in the state, we're all responsible because it matters to all of us. It impacts all of us. You know, having someone employed and housed is a much better outcome than living in a shelter, unemployed, and one step from going back to the familiar, from going backwards. This is about moving forward. 2019 is about moving forward. So I'm going to continue to do all I can. I'm going to continue to deal with my own uncomfortability in this process. But more importantly, I'm going to continue to be a voice and a champion for change in the state of Connecticut. And we need everybody at that table. Thank you.
Well, amen. I could stop. But So, barriers, us. We have to take responsibility. The politics of our country have to change. We just saw in our country moving in that direction. Long way to go, but it went from 2016 to 2018 in the right direction. Even some of the things that we lost in Georgia and Florida that were heartbreaking, they were fantastic also at the same time. And so, are we going to be persistent? Are we going to keep up the effort that we made in 2016? Or are we going to say, well, we did nice there, and so some of us will go home? That's the barrier. There are others, and you've talked to them, and you know all as well. So optimistic, we can do it. Turn everything I said upside down. We can do all of that. We can organize. We can do this nationally. We can take over the country. There's more of us than there are of them. That's right. That's it.
I think your perspective on this is profound, and the history of it is important. So I'd like to ask, you brought up the politics, and one of the divides that's occurring is the working poor, impoverished in like Appalachia versus the city, and a real divide and a feeling of one against the other, because one person is is ignorant, the other is not working, and yet from the time when you started working in politics, the income tax overall was a lot higher. Welfare reform hadn't happened yet. So I wonder if you can talk about the impact of that as we're grappling right now in the state with what do you do for revenue to provide services and the like, of the impact of the type of changes that have happened over time on poverty.
Well, I think that first, we need to remember with all, we don't feel like we're doing very well about poverty, and yet we should know that what the things that we've done, you know, if you listen to some of these people, they say we had a war on poverty and poverty won. You've all heard that. And that's not true. We would have the things that we've done, from Social Security to the Earned Income Tax Credit to Child Tax Credit and housing vouchers and Pell Grants and so on. The fact is we would have more than twice as many people poor as we have right now. Now, it's not acceptable that we have 41 million people who are poor. That's our agenda to go forward. But to say that everything we did didn't work, it's absolutely true, it's wrong, and we all have a responsibility to say that we would have double the number of those in poverty if we hadn't done all those things. So that's the beginning of the discussion. Then, just what I said before, the only way we get to any of these things, and some of them are complicated, we have to be strategic and see what we can do step by step in changing the way tax systems are in states and, of course, nationally as well. It would be a long conversation, which probably I'm not, don't have the capacity to do that because I don't understand exactly what to write in a statute about having real tax reform. But I will say that what we need to do going forward is to figure out, and this is a really hard thing, because on the one hand, those of us who are very concerned that there is not justice in our country for essentially half the people in this country. Because if you look at what we've been paying, the wages that people have had, where people have gone nowhere for about 45 years now, that's what's caused a lot of the anger in our politics. And I think it is possible to say, wait a minute, and speak to everybody, and anybody who's above 50%, that's fine, that's a joke too. But the people who really, really hurt, to speak to them, to listen to them, listening like we're doing right here, no matter which we are, white or black, because they're disproportionate people of color, but there's plenty of white people who are hurting, who actually think that you're all those of color, you're getting all this stuff for free and we're getting screwed, they think. We need to get that conversation so that it's inclusive in that time. But the other thing that makes this differently, it's inclusive and it includes everybody, but we're also going to talk about race at the same time. That is what we have to do.
We're about ready to go to break. If anyone has a burning question, I'll entertain it. Earl?
Just, Mr. Edelman, with the reform that happened 20 plus years ago with welfare, do you feel vindicated? And
Yes, sir.
you do?
Well, sure. I mean, it's so horrible, and some of us understood that what was going to happen with the block grants, especially, but also the time limits and the work requirements and all that stuff, we could understand. And the first 4 years it was a little bit unclear because there was a jump up, for about 4 years, and so moms that were out there who didn't have a job got a job because there were jobs available, and so it looked like the statute had been part of it. Wasn't. And then after that, it's just gone steadily down. Now we have it was 14 million people got cash assistance with watch. I actually think it's too many. Down to when Clinton came in, it's down to below 3 million people. I mean, we basically don't have cash assistance in our country anymore, and so we have 7 million people in this country whose only income is food stamps, that is deep, deep poverty. So I'm sorry to say I was absolutely right. And thank you for asking that.
And I think what that also speaks to is the larger theme that's going on here. At one point, you can feel like you're a voice in the wind, and then all of a sudden, you're vindicated from the people that are around.
Yeah, we got two voices in the wind now.
Yeah.
Maybe the whole room on that. But it's tough to get that back. That there is no significant discussion of those 18.5 million people in this country who have incomes below half the poverty line. Who even talks about that? And it is really, really troublesome.
Because what Professor Edelman points out, though, is something that I think a lot of times we miss, and that is not only is the issue of race important, but there is a anti-elite movement also. There's a class issue also,
Yes.
and part of the reason why you're able to have poor whites feeling like immigrants or black or brown or Hispanic are taking their jobs, and we're in this position because you're all getting the benefits, is because that's the divide and conquer method, right?
Yeah.
When you're all in the same poverty boat.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to say, Mr. Curtis and I attended the same racial justice summit put on by DCF, and it's a perfect example of how you can attend something like this and carry something forward. I was so surprised to see in the rules of engagement about safety and comfort, because I learned it for the first time on October 26th. We had the privilege of being in the presence of Dr. Kenneth Hardy, who taught me that. And I thought, wow, I clearly other people knew, but you can tell from our comments, much of what now informs how I speak about race was the influence in what Dr. Hardy said. So I just want to say, with that way to take it forward, there's nothing more frustrating than being at something like this, and we all feel good or not when we walk out, but we do nothing. Right? And things stay the same. So it's important, I think, to carry something forward. And that's a tangible example that you and I did that. So that's great.
I just want to say that that's a great segue into the discussions, because that's what today is all about. One person, one action. I've been to 1,000 conferences, but what are we going to do today when we leave here? We talk and we talk, but what action are we going to take on an individual basis when we leave here? Let's put it into practice. Because it's one thing to know it, it's one thing to understand it, but it's a whole other thing to apply it to your life. Thank you.
I'll just make one final pitch to that idea before everyone's sitting down with the big bellies because of Thanksgiving dinner. And before you start arguing, us white folks, about why someone shouldn't be taking a knee, let's put that on first and then have the conversation. I want to thank everybody, and it was a tremendous amount of fun, and I look forward to the conversation later on in the day. Yeah, so now will be the break. About 15 minutes. 10 minutes, and we'll be back then at 1:45.
Okay. And I also hope that everyone took the opportunity to take a selfie at the registration booth when you came in. If you haven't, when we take our next break or toward the end of the day, please go out and take a selfie. All of those selfies will be posted on the Everyday Democracy Facebook page. All right. So a couple more people can find their seats. But as they're finding their seats, we are going to invite Anderson Curtis and Gus Mark Hamilton to the front. Anderson and Gus have created a skit for us, and they're going to show us, they're going to dramatize some concepts for us that we hope that everyone will be able to take in, because you're going to use those concepts later to think about your discussion at your tables, okay? So help me in welcoming Anderson and Gus.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. This skit is based upon the reality of our experiences within the criminal justice system.
My partner and I will perform this skit to highlight racial disparities in the criminal justice system, including education, arrest, arraignment, sentencing, and reentry.
I grew up in Mansfield. My parents were both public school teachers, and my two sisters and I grew up comfortably and securely.
I grew up in New Haven. My grandparents raised me. I never had a relationship with my parents.
Act 1, school. I did fine in school. I received good grades and began looking at colleges in my senior year. My guidance counselor advised that I apply to UConn, with Wesleyan and Trinity as my reach schools.
I did well in my classes. I received straight A's. When I met with my guidance counselor, he suggested I go to trade school, like Lincoln Tech. I don't understand. We had the same grades. Why wasn't I encouraged to go to college?
Act 2, arrest. One night at a house party, the police came. I was arrested and charged with possession of 1 ounce of powder cocaine. My bond was set at $5,000.
I was out getting Chinese food one night and was stopped by the police. I was arrested with possession of 1 ounce of crack cocaine, charged with intent to distribute and selling within 1,000 feet of school. My bond was set at $500,000. I don't understand. We both had 1 ounce.
Act 3, arraignment. My family hired a lawyer, and the bail commissioner recommended that my bond be reduced from $5,000 to a promise to appear so that I could seek treatment. The judge granted my request.
I was remanded to custody, but my bond continued at $500,000, which I could not afford. I would have to pay a bondsman $50,000 to get out. I don't understand. Why am I going to jail?
Act 4, sentence. I was sentenced to a 90-day inpatient program to be followed by a 6-month outpatient program and 1 year of probation.
I received a 5-year mandatory minimum sentence with my parole eligibility coming after I served 85% of my sentence. I was also sentenced to 2 years special parole, 5 years probation. I don't understand. Why did he get a 90-day treatment program while I go to prison for 5 years?
Act 5, reentry. I was able to get through treatment and completed probation. I went back to school and graduated with a bachelor's degree.
After serving 85% of my sentence, which was over 50 months in prison, I was paroled to a halfway house. Any violation of my parole, including whether I committed a new crime or simply didn't meet the conditions of my parole, could trigger a return to prison. Because I was convicted of a drug charge, I am not eligible for a Pell Grant to go to college. We don't understand. Where is the justice?
Let's give Gus and Anderson just one more round of applause. So now we get to the part that all of us get to take a part in, and that's the conversation at the table. We have team members who will facilitate the discussion at each table. If you are a facilitator at your table, would you raise your hand?
Which table's we on?
All right. Who's a facilitator? What table is this? Aha, there's your facilitator. All right. And facilitators on this side of the room, fantastic, fantastic, fantastic. Yes, fantastic again. All right. So your facilitators are going to walk you through a 40-minute conversation about the issue of poverty, criminal justice, and race. Enjoy your dialogue. You're in the hands of your facilitators.
All right. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. Oh, great. Good. Are you with us? Terrific. So I'm Richard Frieder, and it's my pleasure to work with you over the next 40 minutes, and then we're going to take a break and do another dialogue for about 40 or 45 minutes. And we're just going to start by introducing ourselves. Let's go around, say who you are, and where you live, and what legacy do you want to leave behind? Just a few words about when time is up. I don't mean today, I mean what do you want to be remembered for? What legacy do you want to leave behind? So who'd like to start? Okay, thank you.
I'm beginning with my birth. I'm from Hartford, Connecticut. I'm raised in here all my life. I think the legacy, I never thought about legacies before, except for recently. I want to be remembered as a person of her word, put a problem in front of me, and I'll work with Black Health to find a solution.
Great. Thank you.
I'm Liz. I was born and raised in Hartford. I live in the shoreline now, but I'm a social worker and an educator. I think I want my legacy to be that I left the world a little bit better than I found it, and that I gave voice to different people and always had the opportunity.
I live in Carmack from Hartford. I can't really remember
Michelle White. I will say primarily from Hartford since coming to the United States. In terms of legacy, just giving young people an opportunity to dream beyond what they thought that they could achieve. So although I work as a professor, I think my passion is just working with.
Okay, great, thank you. Anybody else?
I don't remember what grade it was. It's probably more because of my it's like television. They say things, and I can understand why people were saying that people that were colored, because I went to a period where people were called colored people. If they were saying things about me, then I was baffled because that like they were talking to me, and it was like I
don't think at that point I was raised conscious until they are
I'm glad two kids this even have to allow her to take a month off from work. Probably, I don't have to take a job where you know what I mean? A month at a time. And then also, something else I learned that when you go to trial, they call it both the prosecutors in return have where they give me. I don't want that person. I want and they have to come to terms and agree. So, and I don't want to I don't want to bring OJ out or go back to like OJ. There were minorities on that jury. OJ had a white jury. Would he have? You know what I mean? But I just noticed that when I went over the case, certain things that stood out. Which is every police officer I feared for my life. There was a traffic stop, and the person was most of not all cases were shot while driving away from the scene. Shot. So.
We could talk all day just about that. But thank you for sharing your own story. That's a great, unfortunately, a great illustration. It seems like we're all in agreement that the criminal justice system is not blind to race and poverty. So,
and I just want to add that everything you're bringing up is absolutely true. Even when you think of who are our judges, it's beautiful to see a black judge, right? But who are our judges? Who are defense lawyers? Have they had any experience, meaningful experiences with people, minorities who don't look like them? You know, and when I say meaningful, not just meaningful, right? But actually, will you invite them to your house party type of relationship? I think there's so many people who make decisions about people who don't look like them and have no experience whatsoever.
versus 48 or 49%. Which is scary because it's telling us that almost half the country has a different mindset. I think my cousin just said, you know, right? So some people, it's not that they're racist, you're a bystander. You're a bystander to everything that is going on.
Everything is just been promised you walk into the situation or that's the one that's always you get more options black lives doesn't matter. It's like the more money you got, you know, the more options you have. Okay.
There's some areas right now. Like, I think I get what you're saying.
Look at the Michael Scapegoat thing. I mean, this picture came out. He's really Kennedy plant. You know. So, in theory, you know, I guess the allegation was that you killed this girl with. So we said he's allowed to sue. So, like, how many times did that case get? I mean, these people basically have everything in their mind. So basically, you can try to
report out.
But we have to write
Okay, so for this portion, at every table we were talking about the opportunity for Connecticut. We do want a better Connecticut, right? Yes, that's what we're here for. So every table, if I could have one person come up and say what is an opportunity that we have, and then a barrier, right? So we got that. Everybody was able to handle that. An opportunity and a barrier. So, if I can have the representative from table 1. Barrier first, opportunity first, and then
Okay, so for barrier to opportunity, we saw barriers as the biggest barriers are power, money, and I added one of stubborn people. And we saw opportunities out of those barriers to galvanize people, to elect people who will enact change. So for both for power and for money is really to galvanize, get organized, get people together, and put people in office who can enact change. So that's where we saw barriers and opportunities. And for those stubborn people, we thought to create more inclusive spaces and invite those people into our conversation.
Thank you. So for table, one of each. For table 2, one opportunity and one barrier.
Afternoon, everyone. I'm Kenyatta. So one of the barriers that we identified was the fact that many of our institutions are funded through fines that then reinforce the criminal justice system. So we saw it as a major barrier to actually making change because we fund institutions based on the fact that people are getting fined for parking tickets, traffic tickets, and all those things. But an opportunity that we saw is that many of the systems and institutions are really unsustainable. And so now is the time to really galvanize on the momentum that's been going and really form sustainable movements based on the fact that these systems and these institutions aren't actually really working well for all of us. So that was an opportunity that we saw.
All that depth, and all I recognized was that they both used the word galvanize. Is this table 3? Table 3. Oh, okay, cool. Okay, so table 3, the barrier is having the resources to navigate the system. All right. And the hope is we're looking to enlarge the network through our action and to reaching out to people outside of your normal sphere, right? So obviously this room is well represented today, but it could have been better represented. And how can we achieve that going forward? It's not a judgment or anything, but it's about the work that we have to do to go forward, to get more people into these conversations, to create the change, to be the change that we want to see in Connecticut. Thank you. This is similar to what table 1 I said, right? Bringing the stubborn people into the conversation. Table 4, one opportunity and one barrier.
So, sorry, again on the roll. So one opportunity, one barrier that we saw was the terminology. You know, what we're using, the terminology, how we see ourselves. And the opportunities that we have is that we do have established languages and practices to change the language. You know, I would discuss CBT, DBT, things like that, and how that can better, better empower individuals to embrace, what change. Yeah, there you go.
All right, so table 5. I was table 5. Does somebody want to represent our group? So one barrier and one opportunity.
One barrier would be not recognizing implicit biases and institutional racism. The difference between institutional racism and discrimination. Discrimination is a very intentional thing, whereas racism can play out unintentionally because it's already institutionalized. An opportunity would be seeing promise in everyone, the ability to vote for folks who have power. If we need to work within the system, then put people in power who are intentional and reconstructing what currently is, looking for shared wait, this is different. This is all one?
Yeah.
Well, currently,
First off, I wanted to shout out James because he can actually read my handwriting. That was beautiful.
Okay, one of ours got addressed over there, and I just wanted to repeat it because it bears repeating. The negative impact that industries will have that rely on the prison industrial complex. So, you know, all the transportation and people that provide meds for these facilities. So a theme that we realized for people that are incarcerated, where a lot of people suffer from addiction, mental health issues, and poverty. So an opportunity was supporting entities that help people that are going through that, like greater harm reduction centers, people that help with drug addiction, you know, boosting education, stop hiring teachers and hiring police, things like that.
Yeah,
So I think we pretty much came up with a lot of the same things. We talked about the barriers, the systems of inequality that are ingrained within our institutions, whether it's policing or school or rehabilitation. And that an opportunity, we said, is that to take advantage of self-interest, that this is a bipartisan issue right now, and regardless of the reason why people want to be brought into this table, but that this is an opportunity to create dialogue with inclusive and diverse people, and that it's a way of changing the narrative to include this, you know, making this connection with humanity and finding common ground in order to shift the paradigm of these institutions that are not sustainable, hopefully.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. Okay, so the barriers is lack of education, lack of economic equity, which is low living wage, poor mental health assessments, and lack of system change. The opportunities is to stand true and to understand the history of African American people and bring that into the schools, not using slavery first. Another one is to apply the truth and reconciliation model and to get your criminal record expunged. Thank you.
So we came up with some of the barriers that we feel in Connecticut, or that the government wants a lot of us in prisons, and the lack of state funding for everything. And opportunities to change that would be diversion programs, such as an alternative to arrest, and so we can create more programs that help with people that have substance abuse. All right.
Last but not least,
hi everyone, I'm Tamika. Our group decided that one of our group decided that one of our barriers was that public defenders are not as funded as prosecutors in Connecticut. And one of the opportunities is that we need a stronger Democratic majority, more women, youth, and individuals who have been incarcerated going out to vote and having the option to vote. Okay.
All right, so before I get into this next section, everybody, let's all have a round of applause for one another. Thank you. Yes. Okay, so as you've seen, some of us have similar ideas, right? We're talking about resources, we're talking about underfunded schools, we're talking about education, talking about giving people an actual second chance, right? So there's some commonality, but what I love about doing these small group dialogues is there's certain things that do keep coming up, but then there's something that comes up like, oh, I never even thought about that, right? So that's the point. That's the importance of it. So I do want to stress that let us stay in contact with one another. If you didn't register online, make sure you sign in, find somebody with one of these cool shirts on, and sign up so we can send you an email with our follow-up. We're going to type up all of these notes, right, and try to get that out to everybody because we do want to stay in contact with one another. So with that being said, on every table there should be a bunch of cards on it. If you could find the card, like the colored cards right there in the middle, the orange ones. Yeah. Okay, we'll get you some.
They're so touchy. They're so touchy.
Okay, so with those cards, if you could write down one thing that you're going do after today, that's, that will address how poverty, the legal system, and and race, how they intersect. What's one thing that you could do to address that? That's one thing. Then another thing is, what's one takeaway from today? Something that you learned, maybe you didn't learn, somebody you met, maybe you didn't know before, or an opportunity that you've come to realize you can address moving forward. So one thing that you learned, and one thing that you want to do after today moving forward. Does that make sense? All right, I'll get this table some cards. Oh, they got them. Good. Thank you, Sandy. So I'll give you a couple of minutes for that, and then I will pass it on to Shelby to close the title.
So yesterday, I heard you say legal system as opposed to criminal justice. Is there a reason for that?
There is a reason for that. Thank you for asking, Charmaine. So at my table, Brother James, right, when I came across the question about something about criminal justice system being poor, how much does it, affect you, or whatever have you. And he was like, well, the being poor, no one's affected by the justice system because the justice system doesn't exist, right? It's not, our system is not just. So therefore, we can't have a justice system. But it is legal, right? It comes through legislation and laws. So it's a legal system, but it's not a justice system. So even rethinking the way we look at it. And he also had this other idea I never thought about it, with lady justice being blind, right? It's like we're giving a blind woman a sword and 2 scales, right?
Daredevil.
True. Oh, really? Nobody's gonna laugh at Daredevil? Okay.
It's just us.
All right, so with that being said, I'm gonna pass it off to Shelby. And leave the cards on the table. We're gonna type those up. That's more for you, but we will get back to you on that.
Thank you, Sagacity.
Oh, one thing you learned and one thing that you want to do moving forward.
One thing you learned and one thing you want to do moving forward.
Yeah, I'm collecting.